Welcome to Church Without Walls. It's been a minute since we've been here. We took a few weeks off. If you haven't been following the news about our family, we lost our son Karter. He passed away a few weeks ago, and we last Sunday had his memorial. And Payton and I would just like to reflect on a few things about her brother Karter.
I have something planned to say.
Okay. And just a couple of existential truths that I've landed on the sharp points of in regard to grief and sorrow and hope. And so we hope you stay with us right after this. So I'm John Kirkwood, and this is Church Without Walls. And that number 19 jersey you see hanging in the back, that's my son's paintball jersey. And some friends from years ago, whom he played competitive paintball with back in Chicago, brought that out for us as kind of a tribute to him. We ended up having that at the memorial for that group of his friends that he played with to sign with a marker. We're going to hang it up next to a wonderful painting that's been done of that evening. Boy, where do we start? Do you want to talk, or do you want to just break in when you feel comfortable?
Well, I could start and then you could go last. I know you like going last.
One of my children gets that, huh? Connor didn't get that last week, huh? But Connor makes his own rules, and I kind of appreciate that. So I guess let's just talk about Cardi.
Okay. Today I want to talk about what Cardi showed me.
Okay.
He showed me a lot of TV shows and games.
I'm not sure you're focused. You keep talking, and I'm going to try and
Some of the
focus.
best shows and games that ever existed, in my opinion. Like, to start with the shows, SpongeBob, The Simpsons, Rugrats, and lots of cartoons. He showed me cartoons mostly. But on my tablet here, I have some games downloaded in a folder called Cardi. You can't see it very well, but I can tell you what's in it. Slithery.io, I think it's called, is a game about a worm where you collect all the dots and try not to die, pretty much. Just kind of go in a circle and try not to get hit by other worms.
Kind of sounds like Pac-Man with a worm.
Yeah, except not ghosts, just other worms. Then there's Hungry Shark Evolution and Hungry Shark World. Is where you're a shark and you eat people and fish and try not to die by other bigger things and just try to kill golden fish and people to get coins to buy bigger sharks.
So you eat to the glory of God.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then, like I said, he showed me The Simpsons. I got a game called Tapped Out. That reminded me of him because it's The Simpsons official game. Then there's Happy Wheels, where you're a person trying to defeat obstacle courses, but they're very dangerous, so it gets very bloody.
Mm-hmm.
Very bloody.
Weren't you telling me that you were really happy before you went back to school?
I'll get to that.
Oh.
Then there's Kick the Buddy.
Kick the bunny?
Buddy, no animal cruelty.
Oh, kick the buddy. You're kicking
Buddy.
a friend?
No, he's not your friend. You actually hate him. It's a little sock puppet that you buy weapons. The more you kill him, the more money you get, and then you could buy other weapons. So, then there's Monkey City that both my brothers showed me. Is a game where you're a monkey and you hate balloons, so you gotta kill the balloons. It's very confusing.
A lot of destruction in these games.
Yeah, Karter liked destruction, but this one isn't. Well, okay. Fruit Ninja. That one's not too bad. He also showed me Fruit Ninja, where you're a ninja, and you gotta slice the fruit. It's more exciting than it sounds. And then the last one is Subway Surf. Mm-hmm. Me and Karter, before he left to go back to school, last time I saw him, I think, before he left, we played Subway Surfers. And it's a really fun game, and he just challenged me to beat my score. He couldn't. He only got 10,000. Right after he tried to beat me, I actually beat my score. I got 64 or 65,000. Mm-hmm. Pretty good.
Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was making the video, the memorial video of Karter, was just how many of the pictures involved you and your brother. Like, as you were growing up, he loved to hold you, and he loved to sit with you, and he loved to tease you, and to put your cat, or his cat, on your lap. Caspo. And so last Sunday, we had the memorial, and I don't want to bore you, but I just want to share a few things about that memorial and just how it actually took place on the top of a rooftop bar in downtown Phoenix, and Payton's showing you. That's actually more interesting than what I'm talking about, but that's fine. Karter had a number of appointments with doctors and specialists, and on one occasion, his mom was taking him to a specialist in that neighborhood. And Karter pointed up to the building, and he said, "Mom, I want to take you and the family from the rooftop at the top of the Cambria Hotel, because the views there are amazing, and you'd love the sunset view." And so after Karter passed, we were talking about this, and Wendy brought that conversation up that she had with Karter, and Connor took the reins on all the arrangements, and he said, well, Dad, we're gonna have to have it there. We're gonna have to have the memorial for Karter from the rooftop. And he made a few calls, and he arranged everything. And last Sunday night, we all arrived there, and there was people that flew in from all over the country. You probably want me to change it. Are you going to do any art today, or are you just going to play games? Okay.
I will do art.
Yeah, because I'm thinking this might be a slight distraction, but...
Okay.
This is the last game that you played with your brother, right? And he couldn't beat your high score?
Yep. I'm the best.
Let's see if you can finish that piece of art that you started like a month ago.
Oh, come on.
All right. So, let's see, where were we? We ended up at from the rooftop, and people came in from all over. Karter had multiple friends from the neighborhood growing up, to the paintball team, to high school friends, and some very dear college friends that he met in the last couple of years. And so there was this wonderful group of people that met there. And I just want to share a couple stories from that night that I think reflect well on who my son was and how we will remember him fondly. And I'm going to share my two favorite moments of the night. Now, saying this, there was joy all night long, seeing people I haven't seen in a while that came out to honor my son, hearing stories that I had never heard before, crying, consoling one another, laughing together. All of this happened. So please don't be upset if you're not in one of these two stories. And 99.9% of you won't be, but really the whole night was absolutely amazing. And Wendy's favorite moments are different than mine, and they're probably different from Payton's, but two of the moments that utterly took my breath away and I couldn't talk. I'm going to share those moments with you now. One of them was a girl I had never met who Karter had just recently befriended. Her name was Lily. Lily and Karter met each other in a doctor's office as they were both waiting for MRIs. And at some point, Karter was done, and I guess he could have left. But he saw Lily, and he saw she was scared. And so Wendy and I were shocked to find out that Karter introduced himself and began to talk to Lily because he was really shy. Karter was a shy kid, and not around his friends, but around strangers. Karter was pretty shy. But anyway, Lily told this story, and she said, yeah, Karter could tell I was nervous, and he sat with me for 2 hours while I waited to go in, and then after the MRI, he took me here from the rooftop to see the sunset and to enjoy some time together. And Lily didn't know Karter that long. He passed not long after they got to know each other. And she found out somehow on the internet that he had died, and she got in contact with Connor and found out about the arrangements and showed up that night. So it was a surprise to his mother and I. And Lily told the story, and we were shocked that our shy little Karter would reach out to somebody like that. And it just warmed our heart to think that in the midst of his struggles, he was empathetic, or at least aware of other people's struggles. Sposy, can you figure out what Payton's and what Bella's chewing on?
Not a dog.
Yeah.
Just her toy.
Can you get rid of her or her toy, or because
Bella, stop playing with your own toy. Even though this is the one time you're not chewing in my stuff, and now you're probably gonna chew on my stuff, and then it's gonna be all your fault.
As long as she chews quietly. So she's trying to get her toy. That makes for good television, I guess. Now you're teasing her. Oh, and she got it. Anyway, well, I guess she's got to keep herself in. So this was something. Now Karter's his own person, but I couldn't help but think of my mother, who was a very terribly shy person herself. And if people didn't know her, most people who knew my mother knew her later in life, and she was very kind and very welcoming and warm, and they would never have guessed that she was ever shy, but she was shy. And when she first started attending the Moody Church, she saw, when you suffer, you notice other people who are suffering. You have that antenna, you have that radar. It's what drove Princess Diana to be compassionate for those who had suffered loss or who were disabled or so forth, because she had a troubled life growing up, and she could see it in other people's eyes and faces. And my mother could see people who were alone and who were shy and who were kind of invisible to the rest of the church at Moody Church. And she decided one day that this must be her calling, that God is calling her to have a ministry to these people. And so she overcame her shyness because of something greater than herself, because she wanted to serve God and she wanted to bring comfort to those who felt like they didn't fit in. And that's what my mom is pretty much known for. If you talk to anyone who knew her, they were like, Mary was so kind and she was so welcoming. And so it kind of warmed Wendy and I's heart to hear that story, the story by Lily, that Karter kind of looked after her. The other story I want to tell you is one from Bubba. Bubba was one of Karter's college friends, and Bubba was the last person to see Karter before he passed in the night. And Bubba came up to me and he said, I just have to tell you the story because it epitomizes who Karter was to all of us. And, I think about a month or so before Karter passed, he woke up and he had a fractured rib. And he went to the ER and they couldn't figure out how this happened. And they said, were you in an ATV accident after they, did their, scans? And he said no. And a few days later, and I think it was the top rib or it was one that doesn't usually fracture. And then a few days later, the opposite side, the other side, he woke up in great pain and the other side had fractured and he went to the ER again. So the story picks up there and Bubba said, Karter called him one day and he said, hey bud, what are you up to? Are you doing anything? And Bubba said no. And Karter said, could you come pick me up? I'm at the ER. And I Ubered here, but I don't have a ride. You want to pick me up? So Bubba jumped in his car and he went and he picked up Karter. And he said when Karter came out, he could tell he was in pain. But when they saw each other, Karter had a big smile on his face and he said, hey Bubba, thanks for picking me up. And that's something I want to say to his friends that are watching. You brought so much joy to my son, and I saw it. And that was a really precious moment for me as a father, is to see the people that he loved and loved to be with. They just brought out so much joy, even in the midst of all that was going on these last months. And that story that Bubba shared was just another moment that really helped to hear, because I think that's who Karter was. He really tried to put others, even though he was he could easily have just focused on his own burdens. Well, after I made some comments at the rooftop about my son, and those comments, I'll list the link here. I don't want to redo them all, but I don't think I'd call it a eulogy. I'd just call it a remembrance of my son. After my son and I and his friends, Charles and Ryan, talked about Karter, we took some pictures by the sunset. It's a beautiful setting, and you'll see some pictures from that. But after we did that, a gentleman approached me, and he worked at the hotel, so he wasn't there actually for the event because he knew Karter. He was there because he was working the event. He was the head of engineering and security there. And he said, your remarks really moved us. And that when you said that Karter found comfort here, and he'd like to sit in those bucket chairs over by the edge of the roof where he'd watch the sunset, we just felt that it would be the right thing to do to give you the chair that Karter sat in. And we want you, the family, to have that. And so this was another moment that was just a really powerful moment. And here is that chair. Jeff, the head of engineering and safety at the Cambria Hotel, from the rooftop, delivered the chair yesterday. And that's Payton and Bella having a moment with it in our backyard. And
I'm taking a nap.
Yeah.
It was really comfortable.
It was really comfortable.
Cushion for it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And so that was just a beautiful moment. And this is where the event happened. This is an artist's rendering of that night. He drew a kind of a portrait of us standing around the table that's somewhat true, but it has Karter in it. And every time I walk past this painting, that actual sky was actually the sky of the night that we celebrated Karter's life. And so every time I walk by and I see that painting, I'm moved and I smile. So I'm just going to wrap this up and say a few things about grief and sorrow and my hope as a father. So I'm 54, and one of the first things I realized just over these few weeks since my son's passing is the nature of this sorrow is unlike anything I've ever felt. This grief. I've known grief throughout life. None of us are immune to when life happens. And I've known sorrow. Sorrow has visited, you might say. There's been periods of sorrow in my life, resulting from, the ending of a relationship. Certainly, the passing of some of my childhood friends has brought sorrow. When I lost my mother, there was a deep sorrow and a grief. But I would characterize all of those periods as, sorrow came to visit, but didn't stay. And this is different. Losing a child bereavement is different from all that. It's out of the natural realm. The intimacy there as a father to a son, as a mother to a son, brother and sister who are feeling this, it's not something that's going to go away. We'll never forget that Karter's gone because he was such a part of our lives, and it was not expected, and so the next thing that kind of pained me is that I lived, for the most part of 50 some years without knowing this level of sorrow, the kind of grief that becomes your roommate. And it pains me as a father to realize that my daughter is going to carry that from the age of 11 forward, and that my son, Connor, is going to carry that from the age of 22 forward. Okay, you got to take Bella in the other room because now it's like really annoying me.
Bella, please. You're using out this loud.
So,
Here, I'll give you a treat. Give you a treat.
the only thing I can compare it to, and this is in my comments at the rooftop, is kind of like an amputation, kind of like the loss of a limb. That's what it feels like. Although I've never lost a limb, I've heard those who have talk about it, and it's not something that you forget more than a few moments. Maybe sometimes you wake up in the morning and it doesn't occur to you, or maybe on some occasions you still feel your arm there, and then you bump your shoulder, or you try and get out of bed, or you reach to open a door and you realize that that's not really your arm. And a prosthetic could fill in some of the blanks, but it never makes you whole. There will always be a hole in my heart. It's not something that can heal. This is the kind of grief, the kind of sorrow that doesn't really scab over. It's like a daily bleeding. And so I think as a parent, I would just say, if you're in the position I'm in, I know I have to reach for the hem every day for strength. I have to reach for the hem every day. And although it's new to me, I know that the nature of this grief will probably change. I just don't see it going away. And part of me has come to understand that I'm okay with that, because the deeper the love, I think, the deeper the grief and the sorrow. There was a famous movie, and you got to go way back for this, but Ronald Reagan, before he became political, was a Hollywood actor, and probably his most memorable role, Freudian, was in a movie called King's Row. And there's a point in King's Row where Ronald Reagan, his character is in an accident, and a doctor, I won't give away the story, but makes a rash decision and amputates both of his legs. And of course, Reagan, the character, has been knocked out through this whole thing, through this terrible accident. And so when he first wakes up, when he first comes out of his coma or his sleep, he panics and screams, and they hear him from the downstairs, and they rush up the stairs to the bedroom. And young Ronald Reagan is reaching forward in his bed, reaching for his legs that aren't there. And the memorable line is, "Where's the rest of me? Where's the rest of me?" And Wendy and I think that's the first thought we have upon waking every morning. Because Karter, all our children are such a part of us. And so once we get beyond that, in the morning our day begins and we move forward. And I know Wendy would say the same thing, that she reaches for the Lord's hem every day for strength. And so we just wanted to say the outpouring of love has been a great sustenance to our souls. We've had a great outpouring of love from people really all around the country, back in Chicago, here in Arizona and elsewhere, and people really who knew Karter really loved him deeply. Karter was loved deeply, and he was loved deeply by his friends and his schoolmates and so forth. And we love hearing your stories. So if you haven't shared with us personally, maybe you could go to his Forever Missed page. We'll put the link in the YouTube notes here, and you could share your story of Karter and help keep really the impact he made on so many lives memorable and alive. And so I want to end with this kind of what was a sour note for me that turned sweet because of my wife. I had said to Wendy, because we left the ministry, we left the pulpit a few years back and came out here to Arizona really to follow Karter. Karter was really an inspiration for us moving and for my change in careers. And I was reflecting with Wendy on my 20 years of ministry there, and I said it really was all a loss. It was a wash. For 17 years, I had been kind of in a mire of well, it's a subject for another day, but I had been teaching things that I grew to distance myself from. I didn't see a lot of fruit in that ministry. But the last 3 years, I really thought I dialed into what it means to be a Christ follower, and I centered all of my attention and all of my focus on the love of Christ and the unconditional love of Christ and the attitude of a God who seeks out the lost lamb and the lost coin, and certainly who welcomes the prodigal son home with unconditional love, with what truly would be grace. Not just grace we speak of as we're folding and unfolding timelines, or not just rhetorical definitions of undeserved kindness, but an actual outpouring of love on God's children. And so I tried to focus on that, and it wasn't really received well, and part of that was my fault from the previous 17 years. It was seen as strange, which is kind of ironic, and I told Wendy, I think now's the time we start our ministry to the nuns and the duns and the people who've been burned by church settings like the one we grew up in and like the one that we were a part of. And we need to reach out to the prodigal son in the far country. And Wendy said, yeah, it's time. And so the other day I said to Wendy, I said, looking back over those 20 years, they all seem so wasted. So they came to nothing. No one really caught the message that finally lit a fire in me, that finally gave me kind of a born-again experience and cleared the cobwebs and the distractions of what it means to be a Christian away. And I saw really the true Christ and the true gospel message stripped of all idols that had been added to it. And I said, in the last 3 years, which were really important to me, no one heard me. I didn't see any fruit of that ministry at all. And Wendy paused for a moment, and she said, Karter heard you. And the stories we've just been told through a veil of tears from a girl sitting in a doctor's office, from his paintball friends, from his friends in college who did see him in pain, from his childhood friends who never knew him in pain, but knew he was kind and generous and joyful and filled with joy. Karter loved unconditionally. So your sons heard you. Connor heard you. Karter heard you. And Payton heard you. So if the last 20 years only were effective for your own children, then it was a success and it honored God. And so, in a way, I'll take that as a compliment, but I see it as something that was true of my son in spite of his upbringing. Because my sons got there a while before I did. And I learned from my sons, and they were inspirational in pulling me out of the quicksand that I had been in, that I had been born to, that was all I knew, the Plato's cave, in which I learned the black and white, the us versus them, the kind of conditions that were set, the strings that were attached to the gospel, the kind of blunting of who and what Jesus Christ actually was by church and doctrines and denominations and traditions and all that. My sons helped strip away from me when I saw their unconditional love, true unconditional love, not just something we talk about from a pulpit, but that we don't express to the unlovable or the unworthy or the undeserving, which we all are in some way. But I guess I saw it in my sons first, and Wendy was right, and I couldn't argue with her. They might have arrived there before me, but if there was any fruit of the last 3 years, 5 years now, since there's been 2 here in Phoenix, it has manifested itself in the love of my children for others, and in that way, I guess as a shepherd of this flock, I couldn't be more happy for that. So I mentioned my mother earlier. One of her favorite passages was Romans 8. And I mentioned from the rooftop a passage that really helped me as a parent who has gone through this is the passage where David loses his son, and he gets up and he has a feast. He orders the feast. He offers a sacrifice. He thanks God. He shows gratitude. He cleans himself up. He goes from chaos to order, and he orders a feast. And his servants don't understand the change in him. And to me, that's something that I look toward, because that's how we approached Karter's memorial. That it would be festive, that it would be joy-filled, that it would be a memory of the best of my son and his relationships. And that's really what it was. And that's what made it a marvelous night. But as far as my hope to see Karter again, or to hope in life overcoming mortality, I only have one string on my guitar. The only hope I have is in the family motto, my hope is in God. And so my mother's and my wife's favorite passage, and that's why I think they had a lot of similarities, is found in Romans chapter 8, Paul's letter to the Roman church. And I'm just going to give you the tail end of that here, if you want to follow along, verses 35 to 39, when in a triumphant tone, the apostle writes, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, and the way the Greek is posed here, it's written in the sense that in your mind, when you're reading this, you answer no after every phrase. That's the way, the sense of the way this is written. It's meant to be kind of like a band on stage that's calling out to the crowd, and the crowd answers back, or a group of cheerleaders who are trying to enthuse and encourage the home team, and they yell out to their home stands something that the stands return back to them. But this is the sense of it. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And the unscripted remark back would be no one. Shall tribulation, and the scream back from the battalion is no. Shall distress, and the team cheers back, no. Shall persecution, no. Shall famine, no. Shall nakedness, no. Or danger, or sword, no. Hell no, I'll add. Now, I have to tell you, the words here, the encouragement here isn't that we won't know these things. The encouragement here isn't that the Christian shall never know tribulation, because Jesus himself said, in this world you shall know tribulation. You've been born into a broken world. You've been born under a bad moon, under a bad sign. Christianity is the blues. But it doesn't end with the blues. It starts with the blues, and the blueness is the nature in which we are born, the world in which we are born that has loss and suffering and death and even cruelty. So the apostle here isn't saying you'll never know these things. You'll never know tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword. He's not saying that you won't know these things. People down through the ages have known these things. These are the common things that happens to people, and all you need to do is see the blood, sweat, and tears on our pages of history that record these things to know it's true. And some of you don't need to read it in a history book, because as Wendy and I have recently felt, you've known this sorrow. You've walked with it. You've carried it. It's been your companion on your journey. But Paul is saying that these things cannot separate you. They can't divide you from the love of Christ. They can't change the love of Christ. Even as it has been written, for your sake we're killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. But in all these things, while all these things are going on, why this chaos seems to be winning. Well, the thunder and the storm is ongoing, and you see the mast is broken and falling. All these things might happen, but the love of Christ will still engulf us. In all these things, we become more than conquerors through him and his love for us. And he ends with this powerful phrase, for I'm persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other dimension or creature will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. There's no dimension that can separate us, no natural phenomenon, no supernatural phenomenon, not angel or devil, not God himself. There is no person or being or circumstance or condition that can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. If this was the only verse in all of the Bible, it should speak to us, especially neither death nor life. No, the counter distinction between death or life is interesting because in some cases it's death that pushes people away from God. But life pushes people away from God too. People who have it too good. This is why the apostle on another occasion said, not many noble, not many wealthy, not many royals come to God because they don't have a felt need. They don't have a felt need like the rest of us, like the off-scouring, like people who have to scrape together a living, people who've walked with sorrow, people who know, untoward conditions. They're more, maybe, their heart is readily available to receive the good news than others who don't feel a need for it. And yet, there are some who go through tragedy like losing a child, or for Ted Turner, it was losing a sister to cancer. For C.S. Lewis, it was losing a mother at a very young age that pushes them away from God and has them embrace an idea that God must not be there because this pain is so deep and it's so severe, and if God was there, he would have intervened. And sometimes when there's a death, even in devout Christians, when there's a tragedy or a death like this, they go through the stages of grief that overlap, and they get to anger, and they're not angry at cancer, or they're not angry at the drunk driver, or they're not angry at the drug dealer, but they're angry with God. In spite of all the conditions that might have led to the untimely death, they're angry with God. Even devout Christians. C.S. Lewis himself wrote a book called A Grief Observed, in which he grew very angry at God over the death of his wife to cancer. And it shocked some people. It really was shocking to read how he talked to and about God going through that process. I've never had that feeling. My wife has never had that feeling. And I think part of it is, even though Lewis was an Anglican, he was still living under the shadow of this kind of Calvinist view that God predestines everything. That God forces the airplane to crash or the car to swerve into the 4-year-old, or that God is doing all that God caused. That God is even the cause. Some extremist Calvinists even put things like rape or murder or even the Holocaust at God's feet, lay it at God's feet, and say, of course, God was the cause of it. And I think because I never grew up in that environment, I was spared that. So I'm not angry at all with God. As a matter of fact, my hope is in God. I never went through that period where I was shaking my fist at the heavens saying, how could you? And I see, Michelangelo's Pieta, and I see the mother of our Lord holding her dead son in her arms at the foot of the cross. And I see my wife at that point now. And it resonates even deeper with me, but I don't blame God for that. I don't have any anger toward God. As a matter of fact, I have nothing but gratitude. And I think the secret to dealing with sorrow and grief, and it never expunges it. It never completely eradicates this type of grief. But the secret in being able to carry it and still move forward is gratitude. And so I am grateful to God and to all of you who were a part of Karter's life. I am so grateful that I had the honor of being Karter's dad for 20 years. I'm so grateful that my daughter had such a wonderful big brother for her 11 years, and that my son, Connor, had a great little brother for 20 years and a best friend for at least the last. And Karter had a best friend in Connor for at least the last half a dozen years or so, even though they've always loved one another. It just became easier as they grew older. So my heart's broken, but it's grateful. and the hole in it will never heal this side of heaven. It would take a reunion for that. But my hope is that I will see him again one day. As David said, he can't come to me, but I shall go to him. And that's where I rest my hope. But I do want to say, Wendy and Payton and Karter, Carter's family were extremely moved by the outpouring of love that you showed to us, and we will covet your prayers as we move forward during this difficult time. And to any of you out there who need to talk, Wendy and I are here. We've already talked to many of his friends, and we've cried together, and we're healing together. And so if any of you want to share something with us, please reach out. If you didn't know Karter, but you've suffered a bereavement yourself and you need to talk to somebody, Wendy and I are here. And we might need to talk to you. You might be further down the road than we are. And we might need to take your hand as you lead us through this new path that we haven't chosen, but that we must walk. And so, to God be the glory. Karter, we love you, and we will see you again. Do you want to show us what you drew? It looks like it's almost done.
Yeah. I might need one last week just to put the color in because I'm planning to add a little bit of color.
Let me switch over here, and why don't you show us? Look,
I think the gray part is mostly done.
Let me hold it up. Am I holding it up here? I'm not sure it's going to be... Oh, there's the focus is a little bit better right there.
Now, this really dark part is going to have to be like rock, so I'm going to have to lighten it before I add the like rock color. But this is a tree, and then you see something like right here, that's a car we're getting rid of. It's an old van, and then there's a bush right here.
Some birds.
Oh yeah, birds on the sidewalk, and this little dot is a bird. You just can't see in the camera.
It looks like our neighbor's house and a
street
light.
Yeah, street light, a bush, and the neighbor's house. I did really good on the neighbor's house, in my opinion.
I think you did too.
If you look closer,
you got
it's
the
actually
gable
really
vent.
You
did the gable vent.
Detailed.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Detailed.
Well, we'll try and when this is finished, we'll share a picture online. But thanks, Poe. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we sign off today?
Well, all the games I showed are like the best ever, so I think you should download them if you're bored.
Karter had good choice in games, and he loved to play. All right, thanks for joining us this week, folks. We will see you on the other side next week. Until then, God bless. All right, Sposy, I think we're all done for today.
Mm-hmm.